They called me cruel. The humans whispered it in their villages, the fae sang it in their gladed courts, and even the werewolf packs howled it beneath the moon. Valdris the merciless, Valdris the bloodthirsty, the demon lord who knew no compassion. I never bothered to correct them. Fear, after all, served my purposes better than affection ever could. My fortress stood at the edge of the blackened wastes, a sprawling structure of obsidian and iron that seemed to swallow the light around it. I had ruled these lands for 3 centuries, and in that time, I had built an empire on the foundation of strength and absolute authority. Weakness was not tolerated. Sentiment was a liability. These were the principles that kept my realm secure and my enemies at bay. The arrangement with the Silvermoon Pack was purely transactional. They needed protection from the encroaching vampire covens that had been decimating their numbers. I needed workers for my forges and patrols for my borders. We negotiated for weeks through intermediaries, their alpha too proud to meet with me directly, yet desperate enough to deal with a demon. The terms were simple. I would extend my protection over their territory, and they would provide me with tribute. Gold, weapons, soldiers, the usual offerings. But on the final night of negotiations, the Alpha's messenger arrived with an unexpected addition to our agreement. "Lord Valdris," the messenger said, kneeling before my throne with his eyes fixed firmly on the floor. "Alpha Crane offers one more tribute to seal this pact, a member of the pack itself, as a personal servant to your household." I studied the trembling wolf at my feet. This was unusual. Werewolves were fiercely protective of their own. To offer up one of their pack meant either a great sign of trust or a convenient disposal of an unwanted problem. Given what I knew of Crane's character, I suspected the latter. "What makes this servant worthy of my household?" I asked, my voice echoing through the throne room. The messenger hesitated. "They are young, my lord, capable and obedient." Obedient? The word hung in the air like a death knell. In wolf culture, obedience was expected, but to emphasize it suggested someone who had been broken, or perhaps someone who had never quite fit the mold of what a werewolf should be. I almost refused on principle. I had no use for broken things. But something in the messenger's scent caught my attention. Fear, yes, but also guilt. And beneath that, a trace of anger that he was trying very hard to suppress. This transaction wasn't sitting well with him, which meant there was more to this story than a simple offering. "Send them to me," I said. "I will determine their worth myself." The messenger departed, and I returned to my studies. I had ancient texts to translate, territorial disputes to adjudicate, and a demon noble from the southern provinces who was testing my patience with his ambitious border expansions. The matter of one werewolf servant barely registered on my list of concerns. 3 days later, they arrived at my gates just as the sun was setting. I was in my private study when my steward, Morrigan, knocked on the door. She was a shadow demon, one of the few beings I trusted implicitly, and she had served my household for nearly a century. Nothing surprised her anymore, but when she entered, I noticed the slightest furrow in her usually impassive expression. "My lord, the tribute from the Silvermoon Pack has arrived. Have them taken to the servants' quarters and assigned duties in the morning." "My lord, I believe you should meet this one personally." I looked up from my texts. Morrigan was not given to unnecessary dramatics. If she thought I should handle this myself, there was a reason. "Very well. Bring them to the receiving chamber." I made my way through the fortress's winding corridors, passing guards who snapped to attention and servants who pressed themselves against the walls. Fear and respect, always in equal measure. It was the natural order of things in my domain. The receiving chamber was less imposing than the throne room, but still designed to remind visitors of their place. Dark stone walls, narrow windows, and a deliberate chill in the air. I took my position near the fireplace, arms crossed, and waited. When the doors opened, I understood immediately why Morrigan had insisted I come. The werewolf who entered was not what I expected. Young, yes, perhaps mid-20s in human years, but there was nothing broken in their posture. They walked with their chin up, their shoulders back, moving with the natural grace of their kind. Their eyes met mine directly, a flash of amber in the firelight, before they offered a respectful bow that was precisely calibrated to show deference without submission. "Lord Valdris," they said, their voice was steady. "I am Kael of the Silvermoon Pack. I have been sent to serve your household." Most beings who entered my presence for the first time struggled to maintain their composure. I was tall even by demon standards, with features that were carefully calculated to unsettle. Curved horns, eyes that burned like coals, and an aura of power that pressed down on weaker creatures like a physical weight. But Kael stood there, calm and collected, waiting for my response. "You were offered as tribute," I said bluntly. "Why would your pack give you up?" Something flickered across their face, too quick to read. "I am told I will be of more use to you than to them." That's not an answer. It's the only one I have, my lord. Bold, perhaps too bold. I circled them slowly, noting the way they tracked my movement without turning their head, relying on the enhanced senses of their kind. They wore simple traveling clothes, but I could see the lean muscle beneath, the controlled strength. This was a wolf who had been trained to fight. "Morrigan tells me you arrived alone," I said. "No escort from your pack." "The messenger who accompanied me left as soon as I was delivered to your gates." "They were eager to be rid of you." "So it would seem." I stopped in front of them, studying their face. They had strong features, a few small scars that suggested combat training, and that unwavering gaze that continued to puzzle me. There was no fear in their scent. Wariness, yes, but not fear. After everything they must have heard about me, after being sold like property to the demon lord who supposedly bathed in the blood of his enemies, they stood in my receiving chamber without trembling. "Do you know what they say about me?" I asked quietly. "The stories your pack tells." "I know what they say." "And yet you're not afraid." For the first time, something that might have been a smile touched their lips. "I didn't say that, my lord. I said I'm here to serve. Fear doesn't change what is." I found myself intrigued despite my better judgment. In 3 centuries, I had encountered countless beings who reacted to me in predictable ways. Terror, hatred, obsequious flattery. But this calm acceptance was something new. "Morrigan will show you to your quarters," I said finally. "You'll begin your duties tomorrow. Be warned that I have high standards and no patience for incompetence." "Understood, my lord." They bowed again and turned to follow Morrigan out. At the door, they paused and looked back at me. "My lord, if I may ask a question." I raised an eyebrow. "You may ask, I may not answer." "Why did you agree to take me? You could have refused this part of the tribute." It was a perceptive question. I had been asking myself the same thing since I'd accepted the arrangement. "Curiosity," I said. "Your alpha was very eager to include you in our deal. I want to know why." Kael nodded slowly. "When you discover the reason, I hope you'll tell me. I wouldn't mind knowing myself." Then they were gone, leaving me alone in the receiving chamber with more questions than I'd had before. I returned to my study, but I found my concentration shattered. The translations could wait. Instead, I pulled out the reports I had on the Silvermoon Pack and began reading through them with more attention to detail. The pack had been struggling even before the vampire incursions. Their alpha, Crane, had taken power 7 years ago after a brutal challenge that left the previous alpha dead, and the pack divided. He ruled through intimidation and violence, keeping potential rivals under his heel through a combination of strategic alliances and ruthless suppression of dissent. There were notes about pack members who had disappeared or been exiled over the years. Crane consolidated his power by removing anyone who might question his authority. The pattern was clear enough. Kael must have been a problem for him, someone whose presence represented a threat. But why not simply kill them? Why go through the elaborate process of including them in a tribute to me? The answer came to me as I read through the pack's traditional laws. Killing a pack member without cause was forbidden, grounds for challenge by the Council of Elders. But offering someone as tribute to seal an important alliance, that was not only acceptable, but could be framed as an honor. Crane had found a way to remove a rival, while making it look like a noble sacrifice. I sat back in my chair, fingers steepled beneath my chin. So Kael was dangerous, at least to Crane's position. That meant they were either strong, smart, or had some claim to authority that threatened the current alpha. Possibly all three. And now they were in my fortress, technically my property according to the terms of the agreement, cut off from everything they had known. Most beings in that situation would be devastated, but Kael had walked into my receiving chamber with their head high and their eyes clear. Either they were remarkably resilient, or they were hiding their pain behind a mask of composure. I found myself wanting to know which. The next morning, I summoned Morrigan to my study before breakfast. "What's your assessment?" I asked. She knew exactly what I meant. Trained fighter, intelligent, guarded. They spent the evening exploring the servants' quarters and introducing themselves to the other staff. Polite but not subservient. Several of the younger demons were quite taken with them. Were they indeed? "You're interested." It wasn't a question. Morrigan had known me too long to miss the signs. "I'm curious. There's a difference." "Of course, my lord." Her tone suggested she didn't believe that for a moment. "How would you like me to assign them?" It was a good question. The logical choice would be to put them on border patrol or in the training yards, making use of their combat skills. But logic wasn't what was driving my decision. "Assign them to the library," I said. "I need someone to help catalog the new acquisitions from the Eastern Territories, if they're literate." An unusual choice for a werewolf warrior. If Crane wanted them gone badly enough to give them to me, then I want to understand why. Working in the library will give me opportunity to observe them. Morrigan bowed. "As you wish, my lord." That evening, I made my way to the library earlier than usual. It was my private sanctuary, a vast collection of knowledge gathered over centuries. Few were allowed access, and those who were knew that damaging even a single page would result in severe consequences. Kael was already there, carefully sorting through a stack of leather-bound volumes at one of the long tables. They had changed into the dark uniform of my household staff, and their hair was tied back to keep it out of their eyes as they worked. They looked up as I entered and rose to bow. "My lord, I hope I haven't disturbed anything. Morrigan showed me the cataloging system you use." "And do you understand it?" "I believe so. It's more sophisticated than what we had in the PAX archives, but the logic is clear." I moved closer, looking at their work. The volumes were sorted correctly, the notations in the ledger precise and neat. "You had archives." "Every pack keeps records. Lineages, territory agreements, history. I was one of the record keepers." "Not a warrior, then." They smiled slightly. "All wolves are warriors, my lord, but some of us have other skills as well." I picked up one of the books, an ancient text on elemental magic written in a language that had been dead for 500 years. "Can you read this?" Kael leaned closer, studying the page. "No, my lord, the alphabet is unfamiliar." "It's old demonic. Very few outside my kind can read it anymore." I set the book down. "How many languages do you know?" "Common, wolf tongue, and enough trade Elvish to negotiate contracts. I was learning the basics of human high speech before I left the pack." "Intelligent, then. Educated beyond what was typical for pack wolves, who usually focused on combat training and traditional knowledge." Another piece of the puzzle that was Kael. I spent the next hour working at my desk while they continued cataloging, but I found my attention drifting. They moved through the work with quiet efficiency, occasionally pausing to examine a particularly interesting volume before carefully setting it in its proper place. When they thought I wasn't looking, their expression relaxed slightly, and I caught a glimpse of genuine wonder as they handled some of the rarer texts. A wolf who loved books. No wonder Crane had wanted them gone. "Kael," I said, breaking the comfortable silence. "Yes, my lord." "Why haven't you asked me about the first night?" They turned to face me fully, confusion evident on their face. "The first night, my lord. You were sold to a demon lord known for cruelty. Surely your pack told you what to expect. Yet you haven't asked about your duties, your sleeping arrangements, or what I intend to do with you." Understanding dawned in their eyes, followed by something that looked like anger, though it was quickly controlled. "With respect, my lord, I don't believe you're the monster the stories claim. If you were, you would have already shown me. Cruelty doesn't wait for an excuse." "You're basing your safety on that assumption." "I'm basing my behavior on observation. You've been civil. Your staff doesn't fear you the way people fear a tyrant. They respect you. Your steward has served you for decades by choice, and you put me in your library rather than your dungeons." They met my eyes steadily. "Whatever you are, Lord Valdris, I don't think cruel is the right word." I should have corrected them, told them that civility was simply another form of control, that respect born from fear was still fear, that my reputation for cruelty was well-earned through centuries of ruthless decisions. Instead, I found myself saying, "The first night is traditionally when a new servant is given their formal position in the household and their long-term duties are established. Nothing more sinister than paperwork, I'm afraid." The relief that flashed across Kael's face was quickly hidden, but not quickly enough. So they had been worried, despite their brave words. They had simply chosen not to show it. "I see," they said quietly. "Thank you for clarifying, my lord." "Did your pack lead you to believe otherwise?" Their jaw tightened. My pack said many things in the days before I left. Not all of it was reliable information. I could imagine what had been said. Werewolf packs had long memories and longer traditions of storytelling, most of it exaggerated for dramatic effect. By the time the tales of my exploits filtered through their oral histories, I had probably been transformed into some kind of nightmare creature who collected souls and tortured innocents for entertainment. Some of it was even partially true, though the context was usually omitted. "You'll learn that I value honesty and competence above all else," I said. "Perform your duties well, don't betray my trust, and you'll find life here more tolerable than you might have expected. Fail in either regard, and you'll discover that some of those stories have a foundation in reality." "Understood, my lord." We returned to our respective work, but the atmosphere had shifted somehow. The tension that had been hiding beneath Kael's composure had eased slightly, and I noticed they stopped glancing at the door every few minutes as if calculating escape routes. Over the following weeks, a routine established itself. Kael worked in the library each evening, cataloging and organizing while I attended to my correspondence and research. We spoke occasionally, brief exchanges about the books or questions about proper classification. They proved to be a quick learner with a genuine appreciation for knowledge that I found unexpectedly refreshing. Most of my servants did their jobs competently, but without passion. They followed orders, maintained the fortress, and collected their wages. Kael approached each task as if it mattered, handling even the most mundane volume with care and interest. One evening, I found them completely absorbed in a bestiary from the northern kingdoms, their duties temporarily forgotten as they studied an illustration of a frost dragon. "That's not cataloging," I observed. They jumped slightly, closing the book with an apologetic expression. "I'm sorry, my lord, I was distracted. It won't happen again." "What caught your attention?" They hesitated, clearly uncertain whether this was a test or genuine curiosity. The entry on frost dragons mentioned that they can voluntarily enter a state of hibernation that lasts centuries. I was wondering if that's why they've disappeared from the northern ranges. Perhaps they're not extinct, just sleeping. It was a theory I had encountered before in my research. It's possible. The last confirmed sighting was approximately 400 years ago, which coincides with a period of warming in their traditional territories. They may have gone deep into the mountain caves to wait out the climate shift. Kael's eyes lit up. Have there been any expeditions to search for them? 3 that I'm aware of. None successful. Frost dragon lairs are well hidden and heavily protected by natural magic. Even if you found one, waking a sleeping dragon is generally considered a poor decision. I suppose that's fair. They set the bestiary aside with obvious reluctance. I've never seen a dragon of any kind. The pack territories are too far south. I've seen 2. An elder red dragon in my youth, and a storm dragon about 70 years ago during a dispute over territorial waters. What were they like? I found myself settling into my chair, the reports I had intended to review temporarily forgotten. Magnificent. Terrible. Imagine a creature that embodies raw power, ancient intelligence, and complete confidence in its own supremacy. The red dragon looked at me the way you might look at an insect, not with malice, simply with the understanding that I was so far beneath her notice that I barely registered as a living thing. But you survived the encounter. I was very polite and very careful not to give offense. Dragons can be reasoned with if you approach them correctly. They appreciate proper protocol and respect for their status. Kael leaned forward slightly, drawn into the story despite themselves. And the storm dragon. That one was younger and more aggressive. We negotiated, but it was a near thing. Eventually, we reached an agreement about fishing rights in the disputed waters. The dragon got the deeper trenches where the large prey swims, and I kept the coastal areas for my people. You negotiated with a dragon. Would you prefer I fought it? Storm dragons command lightning and wind. Fighting one over something as mundane as fishing territories would have been spectacularly stupid. A laugh escaped them before they could stop it, quickly covered with a cough. I apologize, my lord. That was inappropriate. Honesty is never inappropriate in my presence. False flattery and empty courtesy, those I have no patience for. I studied them for a moment. You may speak freely when we're alone, Kael. I prefer genuine conversation to scripted deference. They looked uncertain, as if suspecting a trap. That's a generous offer, my lord. It's a practical one. I spend most of my time surrounded by people who tell me what they think I want to hear. It becomes tedious. Surely your advisors speak truthfully. My advisors speak strategically. There's a difference. I returned my attention to the reports in front of me, giving them time to process this new dynamic. You should finish the cataloging before you indulge in recreational reading. There are 3 more crates that arrived from the eastern auction houses. Yes, my lord. They returned to their work, but something had changed. The careful distance they had been maintaining had narrowed slightly, and over the next few evenings, I noticed them gradually relaxing in my presence. Small things at first. They stopped standing quite so rigidly when addressing me. When they had a question about classification, they asked directly rather than prefacing it with elaborate apologies. And occasionally, when something genuinely interested them, they would share their thoughts without being prompted. I told myself I was simply being efficient. A comfortable servant was a productive servant, and Kael's work in the library had proven invaluable. The cataloging that I had been putting off for months was nearly complete, and they had even identified several rare volumes that had been misfiled years ago. But efficiency didn't explain why I found myself leaving my study earlier each evening, or why I had begun timing my library visits to coincide with their shifts. It didn't explain the quiet satisfaction I felt when they smiled at something I said, or the way I had started selecting certain books from the collection, specifically because I thought they would find them interesting. Morrigan noticed, of course. She noticed everything. "You're spending a great deal of time in the library lately, my lord," she observed one morning as she delivered my correspondence. "I have research to complete." "Of course, and the fact that your new cataloger is there every evening is purely coincidental." I gave her a look that would have sent most demons scurrying for cover. She remained utterly unmoved, as always. "Kael is competent and intelligent. It's pleasant to have someone to discuss the collection with." "Pleasant, I see. What exactly are you implying, Morrigan?" "Nothing at all, my lord. I simply find it interesting that in nearly a century of service, I've never known you to describe anything as pleasant. Effective, yes. Satisfactory, acceptable. But pleasant suggests you're actually enjoying yourself." She was right, which was exactly why her observation irritated me. I had built my life on control and careful emotional distance. Attachments were weaknesses, and I could not afford weakness. Not when I ruled a territory full of potential threats and rival powers watching for any sign of vulnerability. "Your point is noted," I said curtly. "Was there anything else?" "The vampire delegation arrives tomorrow evening to discuss the border incidents. You'll want to review the casualty reports and territorial surveys before the meeting." Business. This was familiar ground, comfortable ground. I dove into the reports with relief, pushing aside the uncomfortable questions about why a werewolf servant had managed to slip past my carefully maintained defenses. The vampire situation required my full attention anyway. There had been a series of incidents along the border between my lands and the territory controlled by the Nightborn Covenant, a powerful vampire clan led by Lady Severine. Hunters on both sides had been killed, property had been destroyed, and tensions were escalating toward open conflict. I spent the day preparing for the negotiation, reviewing maps and casualty lists, considering various strategic positions and possible compromises. By the time evening arrived, I was mentally exhausted and in no mood for diplomatic games. But when I entered the library and saw Kael there, surrounded by stacks of books and making notes in the catalog ledger, I felt some of the tension ease from my shoulders. They looked up and smiled. "Good evening, my lord. I've finished the Eastern acquisitions. There were some real treasures in those crates." "Anything particularly notable?" "A first edition of Mallory's Compendium of Magical Creatures, a complete set of the histories of the Fey Wars, and unless I'm mistaken, an original manuscript of poetry by Elara Moonwhisper." I crossed the room quickly. "Elara Moonwhisper, are you certain?" "The handwriting matches the samples in your collection, and there's a personal seal on the last page. Look." They handed me a slim volume bound in faded blue silk, and I opened it with careful reverence. Elara Moonwhisper had been one of the greatest poets of the early Fey period, and original manuscripts of her work were extraordinarily rare. Most had been lost in the burning of the Twilight Court 300 years ago. The handwriting was indeed hers, the distinctive flowing script unmistakable. And there, pressed into the wax on the final page, was her personal seal, a crescent moon tangled with thorns. "This is an exceptional find," I said quietly. "How did you know to look for the seal?" "I've been reading your collection notes. You have a section on authentication techniques for rare manuscripts. The seal was mentioned as one of the key identifiers for Elara's personal works." They had been studying my notes, going beyond the basic requirements of their job to actually learn about proper archival research. I found myself absurdly pleased by this. "Well done, Kael. This manuscript alone is worth more than everything else in those crates combined." They beamed at the praise, and something in my chest tightened in a way I hadn't felt in decades. Dangerous. This was dangerous. I was allowing them too close, letting their presence become something I looked forward to rather than simply tolerated. I should have pulled back, re-established the proper distance between master and servant, reminded both of us of our positions. Instead, I found myself saying, "Have you read any of Alara's work?" "A little. We had a translated collection in the Pack archives. I loved her poem about the soldier and the winter star." "That's in this manuscript." I carefully turned the pages until I found it. "Here, this is the original version before it was edited for the public collections." Kael moved closer to see, close enough that I could smell the subtle scent that all werewolves carried, wild and clean, like forests after rain. They read in silence for a moment, their lips moving slightly as they worked through the archaic language. "It's different from the translation," they said softly. "Darker, the ending isn't hopeful at all." Most of Alara's work was edited by later scholars to make it more palatable. They didn't understand that she was writing about real loss, real grief. She had been a soldier in the Fey Wars before she became a poet. The darkness was earned. "Have you been to war, my lord?" The question caught me off guard. It was more personal than anything they had asked before, crossing the invisible line between polite conversation and genuine intimacy. I should have deflected. Instead, I answered honestly. "Many times. I'm 347 years old, Kael. I've seen more wars than I care to count." I closed the manuscript carefully. They never get easier. Anyone who tells you they do is either lying or has lost something essential in themselves. "Is that why you negotiated with the storm dragon instead of fighting?" "That's why I negotiate whenever possible. Battle should be a last resort, not a first option. Victory at too high a cost is just another form of defeat." They were quiet for a moment, processing this. When they spoke again, their voice was thoughtful. "You're not what I expected." "What did you expect?" "Someone harder, crueler. The stories made it sound like you enjoyed violence for its own sake." "I don't enjoy it, but I'm very good at it, and I'm willing to use it when necessary. That's what makes me dangerous, Kael. Not sadism, but the complete willingness to do whatever is required to protect what's mine." The words hung in the air between us, weighted with implication. What was mine? The territory, the fortress, the people under my protection. And now, technically, Kael themselves delivered to me as tribute and bound to my service. They met my eyes, and I saw understanding there, along with something else I couldn't quite name. Not fear, but a kind of careful consideration, as if they were reassessing everything they thought they knew about me. "I should let you work," they said finally. "I'm sure you have important matters to attend to." "Stay," the word came out more sharply than I intended. I softened my tone. "If you'd like, you could read for a while. That section there contains more of Alara's contemporaries if you're interested in that period." They hesitated, clearly torn between the desire to accept and the knowledge that they were already on uncertain ground. "If I'm not disturbing you, my lord, I would like that very much." "You're not disturbing me." It was a lie, but not in the way they thought. They disturbed me profoundly, disrupting the carefully ordered existence I had built. But it wasn't an unpleasant disturbance. It was like standing near a fire after years in the cold, unsettling because you'd forgotten what warmth felt like, but impossible to walk away from once you'd remembered. We settled into our respective activities. Kael curled in one of the armchairs with a volume of poetry while I reviewed the border reports. Every so often I would glance up and find them completely absorbed in their reading, occasionally smiling at a particular passage or pausing to reread something that moved them. This was what peace felt like, I realized. Not the absence of conflict, but the presence of something worth protecting. The thought should have alarmed me. Instead, I returned to my reports and let the quiet comfort of their presence wash over me. The next evening, the vampire delegation arrived. Lady Severine swept into my council chamber with all the dramatic flair her kind favored, her retinue of blood servants and guards arrayed behind her like a particularly menacing peacock's tail. She was ancient by vampire standards, turned during the height of the Imperial Wars, and she carried herself with the absolute confidence of someone who had spent centuries at the top of the predator chain. "Lord Valdris," she said, her voice cold and smooth as winter silk. "How kind of you to finally agree to this meeting. I was beginning to think you were avoiding me." "Lady Severine, please sit. Can I offer you refreshment?" Her smile showed just a hint of fang. "How thoughtful, but I prefer to select my own vintage if you take my meaning." The blood servants behind her remained expressionless. They had all been turned, bound to her service through a combination of vampire magic and carefully cultivated dependence. I found the practice distasteful, but it was legal within her territory, and none of my concern so long as she didn't attempt it within my borders. "Then let's proceed to business," I said, gesturing to the maps spread across the table. "We've had 17 incidents along our shared border in the past 2 months. Hunters from both sides killed, livestock slaughtered, and a burned watchtower that I'm still not convinced was an accident." "My people have suffered losses as well," Severine countered. 3 of my best hunters gone, and the watchtower was clearly within my territorial boundaries, regardless of what your surveys claim. We fell into the familiar dance of negotiation, each presenting evidence and counterclaims, testing the edges of what the other would accept. Severine was a skilled negotiator, but I had been playing these games since before she was turned. By midnight, we had hammered out the framework of an agreement, a joint investigation into the incidents, revised boundary markers in the disputed zone, and reparations for the confirmed casualties on both sides. "You're being remarkably reasonable," Severine observed as her scribe prepared the documents. "I expected more resistance over the Eastern Ridge." "The Eastern Ridge is strategically worthless to me and valuable to you for its cave systems. I'm not going to start a war over terrain I don't need." "How pragmatic." She studied me with those predator's eyes, calculating and cold. "The rumors say you've grown soft, Valdris, that you spend your evenings in your library instead of your war room. Some are beginning to wonder if the demon lord has lost his edge." It was a probe, testing for weakness. Standard practice among the immortal powers who ruled the Dark Lands. Show any hint of vulnerability and the circling would begin, rivals positioning themselves to take what you could no longer hold. "The rumors are welcome to their opinions," I said mildly. "As are you, of course. Though I'd point out that I just negotiated a settlement that gives me everything I actually wanted while letting you claim victory over the ridge. If that's what losing my edge looks like, I'm curious what you think my sharp period must have been like." She laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Point taken. Very well, Valdris, we have an agreement." She signed the documents with a flourish and stood. "Do give my regards to your new pet. The werewolf, yes. I heard about Crane's little gift. Such a transparent disposal of a problem, but I suppose it worked out well for you." Every instinct I had went on alert. "What do you know about it?" "Only what travels through the usual channels. Crane wanted to eliminate a rival without breaking pack law. You gained a servant. Everyone wins, except perhaps the poor wolf who got bartered away like a piece of furniture." She pulled on her gloves, still smiling. "Though between you and me, I'd have simply killed the rival and dealt with the consequences. Crane always was squeamish about direct action." "A rival for what?" "For pack leadership, obviously. Didn't you wonder why he was so eager to be rid of them?" She tilted her head, eyes glittering with malicious amusement. "Your little cataloger is the previous Alpha's child, Valdris, direct bloodline with a legitimate claim to challenge. As long as they stayed in pack territory, they were a constant threat to Crane's authority. But if they just happened to be serving in a demon lord's household, far from pack lands and unable to return." She shrugged eloquently. Problem solved. The pieces clicked into place with sudden, sharp clarity. Kael's education, their combat training, the way they carried themselves with unconscious authority, the guilt in the messenger's scent, and the relief when I accepted the tribute. Even Kael's own confusion about why they had been given up made sense now. They didn't know. Somehow, they didn't know about their own bloodline. "Thank you for the information," I said carefully. "Oh, don't thank me. I just enjoy seeing you caught off guard. It happens so rarely." Severine swept toward the door, her retinue falling in behind her. "Do be careful, Valdris. Werewolf pack politics are messy, and you've just placed yourself right in the middle of them. If Kael ever decides to return and challenge Crane, your protection of them could be seen as interference. And if Crane decides to eliminate the threat permanently..." She paused at the threshold. "Well, let's just say accidents happen, even in the most secure fortresses." The door closed behind her, and I sat in the sudden silence, my mind racing. Kael was the previous Alpha's child, which meant they had every right to challenge Crane for leadership of the Silvermoon Pack. More than a right, by traditional werewolf law, they had a duty. The pack should have gone to them when their parent died, but somehow Crane had seized power instead. How much did Kael know? Did they remember their parent's death? They had mentioned being a record keeper, not a warrior, but that could have been a role they took after the succession rather than a lifelong position. Were they hiding their identity, or had Crane somehow suppressed the knowledge? I needed answers, but I had to be careful how I obtained them. If Kael didn't know the truth, revealing it could change everything. They might feel obligated to return to the pack, to challenge Crane and reclaim their birthright. And that would put them in danger I might not be able to protect them from. The thought of Kael walking back into Silvermoon territory to face Crane sent a cold fury through me that I hadn't felt in years. When had this happened? When had one werewolf servant become someone whose safety mattered more than political convenience? I knew the answer, of course. It had been happening gradually, every evening in the library, every conversation, every small moment of connection. I had been foolish enough to let them matter, and now I was in the very position I had spent centuries avoiding, caring about something that could be taken from me. I found Morrigan in her office, reviewing supply requisitions. "I need everything we have on the Silvermoon Pack succession 7 years ago," I said without preamble. "Specifically, the death of the previous Alpha and how Crane took power." She set down her pen. "May I ask why the sudden interest?" Severine was remarkably well-informed about Kael's background. "I want to know what we missed." To her credit, Morrigan didn't waste time with questions. She pulled several files from her archives and spread them on the desk. The previous Alpha was Thuron Silvermoon, died in what was officially called a hunting accident 7 years ago. Crane challenged for leadership 3 days later and won after a brutal fight that left 2 elders dead and half the pack's warriors injured. What kind of hunting accident? Attacked by a rogue bear while separated from the hunting party. His body was badly mauled by the time they found him. Convenient. Very. There were rumors of foul play, but nothing proven. Thuron's mate had died 2 years earlier from illness, and their child. She paused, scanning the documents. Here, Thuron's heir, age 17 at the time of his death, was deemed too young and inexperienced for leadership. The pack elders agreed that a stronger Alpha was needed given the external threats. Crane's challenge was accepted as legitimate. The heir's name? Kael Silvermoon. So they had been 17 when their world fell apart. Young by werewolf standards, barely old enough to have completed their combat training. And the elders had decided they weren't ready to lead, allowing Crane to take power instead. What happened to Kael after that? Morrigan shook her head. The records don't say. They disappear from official pack business. The next mention is 7 years later, when they're offered as tribute to seal our alliance. 7 years of being invisible in their own pack. 7 years of watching the wolf who might have killed their father rule the people who should have been theirs to lead. And through it all, they had survived, quietly learning and growing stronger, becoming enough of a threat that Crane needed to remove them. "There's one more thing," Morrigan said quietly. "By traditional werewolf law, the heir can challenge for leadership at any time before their 25th birthday. After that, their claim expires and the current alpha's position becomes permanent." "How old is Kael now?" 24. Their birthday is in 3 months. 3 months. Crane had cut it remarkably close, but he had successfully run out the clock. In 3 months, Kael's claim to leadership would expire, and they would never be able to return to challenge him. Unless they learned the truth before then. I should have kept it from them. The smart political move would be to let the deadline pass quietly, allowing Kael to remain in my service without the complication of pack politics. They seemed content here, or at least not miserable. Why disrupt that for a birthright they might not even want? But keeping the truth from them would be a betrayal of the trust we had been building. And I had told them I valued honesty above all else. I found them in the library, as I knew I would. They were reshelving books, humming something under their breath that sounded like an old pack song. They looked up when I entered and smiled, that warm, genuine expression that had become dangerously familiar. "My lord, I wasn't expecting you this early. How did the negotiation go?" "Successfully. We have an agreement with the Nightborn Covenant." I closed the door behind me. "Kael, we need to talk. It's about your pack." The smile faded. "What about them?" "Lady Severine mentioned something tonight, about why you were really included in the tribute." I gestured to the chairs by the fireplace. "Please, sit down." They sat slowly, wariness creeping into their posture. "What did she say?" I settled into the chair across from them, trying to find the right words. There was no gentle way to do this, no careful phrasing that would soften the impact, so I simply told them the truth. "Kael, do you know who your parents were?" Confusion flickered across their face. "My mother died when I was 15, my father. There was a hunting accident when I was 17. Why?" "Your father's name was Thuron Silvermoon." "Yes, he was." They stopped, something changing in their expression as the implications hit them. "No, he was just a senior hunter, not." "He was the alpha, which makes you the direct heir to the Silvermoon pack." They stood abruptly, beginning to pace. "That's not possible, I would know. Someone would have told me." "When did you learn about your father's death?" "I was away from pack lands, visiting the Eastern Archive to study their records. By the time I got word and returned, the funeral was over and Crane was alpha. The elders said I was too young to lead, that the pack needed someone stronger." They stopped, turning to face me. "But if my father was alpha, then I should have been given the choice to challenge. That's the law." "The law requires that the heir be informed of their rights within 3 days of the previous alpha's death. Were you?" "No, they told me weeks later after everything was already decided." Understanding and fury warred in their expression. "They lied to me. All these years, they let me think I was nobody. Just another pack member, fortunate to be allowed to stay after my father died." "Crane needed you removed before your 25th birthday. After that, your claim expires and his position becomes unassailable. Selling you to me was his solution. You're alive, so he didn't break pack law by killing a blood heir, but you're safely far away and unable to challenge." Kael sank back into the chair, looking stunned. 3 months. My birthday is in 3 months." "I know." They looked up at me, eyes blazing with emotion. "You said you value honesty, so I'm going to be honest now. I want to rip out Crane's throat. I want to challenge him and take back everything he stole. But I'm bound to your service by the treaty. Even if I wanted to return, I can't without your permission. And breaking a demon lord's claim on a bonded servant would give Crane grounds to void the alliance." "All of that is true. So what do I do?" It was the question I had been asking myself since Severine left. I could keep Kael here, safe and protected, let their birthday pass, and the decision be taken out of their hands entirely. Or I could release them from service, give them the choice to return and fight for what should have been theirs from the beginning. Both options were defensible. Both had clear strategic advantages, but only one was honest. "What do you want to do?" I asked quietly. They were silent for a long moment, staring into the fireplace. When they spoke, their voice was raw. "I don't know. This morning I was a servant who was content with my life. Now I'm supposedly the rightful alpha of a pack that threw me away. I don't know how to reconcile those two things." "You don't have to decide tonight. Take time to think about it." "If I go back, I'll probably die. Crane has had 7 years to consolidate power. He'll have loyal warriors, and he won't fight fairly." They looked at me. "But if I don't go back, I'll spend the rest of my life knowing I abandoned my people to his rule, that I had a chance to free them and I chose safety instead." "Choosing to survive isn't cowardice." "Isn't it? You told me you've been to war. Did you ever choose safety over duty?" The question hit harder than they knew. I had chosen duty over safety so many times I had lost count, fought battles that should have killed me, made decisions that cost me dearly because they were necessary. But I had also learned, slowly and painfully, that dying for a lost cause helped no one. "I've learned that there's a difference between strategic retreat and cowardice," I said. "If you return now, unprepared and alone, Crane will kill you. That's not noble, it's just wasteful. But if you take time to prepare, to train, to build support—" I paused, weighing my next words carefully. "If you go back ready to win, that's something different." Hope flickered in their eyes. "You would help me." "I would be violating 6 neutrality agreements if I directly interfered in werewolf pack politics." "That's not an answer." "It's the only answer I can give you right now." I stood, moving to the window that overlooked the training yards. "Kael, I need you to understand something. When you arrived here, you were a servant, a piece of property transferred to settle a political debt. But somewhere along the way, that changed. You've become—" I struggled for the right word. "Important to this household, to the work we do here." "To you." I should have deflected, maintained proper distance. Instead, I found myself saying, "Yes, to me." The silence stretched between us, heavy with unspoken implications. "I've never had anyone say that to me before," Kael said softly. "That I was important." "Then your pack was even more foolish than I thought." They crossed the room to stand beside me at the window. "If I choose to go back, if I challenge Crane and somehow manage to win, what happens to us?" "You would be alpha of the Silver Moon pack. I would be the demon lord of the Blackened Wastes. Our alliance would continue, but you would no longer be in my service." "And if I choose to stay?" "Then in 3 months, your claim expires and you remain here. The choice becomes permanent." "Would you want me to stay?" It was the question I had been avoiding, the one that cut too close to the uncomfortable truth I had been trying to ignore. Want was a dangerous thing for someone in my position. Want created vulnerabilities, gave enemies leverage, turned strategic thinking into emotional compromise. But I had told them I valued honesty. "Yes," I said simply, "I would want you to stay, but not if it means you'll spend the rest of your life wondering what you could have been. Not if choosing me means betraying who you are." Kael reached out slowly, giving me time to pull away, and took my hand. Their fingers were warm against my skin, calloused from work but gentle in their touch. "I need time," they said. "Time to think about what I want, not what I'm supposed to want or what everyone else expects. Is that all right?" "Take all the time you need. The offer stands, you're free to choose, and I'll support whichever path you take." "Even if it means losing me." The words hurt more than I wanted to admit, even then. The next few weeks passed in a strange state of suspension. Kael continued their work in the library, but there was a new tension between us, an awareness of everything unspoken. We danced around the real conversation, talking about books and politics and everything except the decision that hung over both of us. I threw myself into training. Every morning before dawn, I was in the practice yards, working through combat forms I hadn't used in years. If anyone asked, I claimed I was simply maintaining my skills. Morrigan knew better. "You're preparing for war," she observed one morning, watching me demolish a practice dummy with rather more force than necessary. "I'm staying sharp." "You're preparing to help Kael fight Crane, which would violate our neutrality agreements and potentially start a conflict with the other werewolf packs." I set down my sword and reached for a water flask. "I'm preparing for all possibilities." "My lord, I've served you for a century. I've never seen you take this kind of risk for anyone." She paused. "They matter to you." "They're under my protection." "They're under your skin." She held up a hand when I started to object. "I'm not criticizing. I'm just concerned. If you go to war for a werewolf servant, every power in the Dark Lands will see it as weakness. They'll test your borders, probe your defenses, try to exploit what they perceive as sentiment clouding your judgment." "Let them try." "Valdris." She used my name, not my title, something she only did when we were truly speaking as friends rather than lord and servant. "What's your endgame here? Best case scenario, you help Kael defeat Crane and reclaim their pack. Then what? They're alpha of the Silvermoon pack and you're the demon lord. You exist in different worlds with different responsibilities. Where does that leave you?" "I don't know," I admitted. "I'm improvising." "You never improvise. You plan. You strategize. You think 17 moves ahead and always have a contingency." She studied me with those ancient shadow demon eyes. "You're in love with them, aren't you?" The words hung in the air like an accusation. I should have denied it immediately, laughed it off as absurd. Demon lords didn't fall in love, especially not with werewolf servants half their age who might leave in a matter of weeks. But I had never been able to lie to Morrigan. "I don't know," I said again, more quietly this time. "I know that when they're in a room, I'm aware of exactly where they are. I know that I've started making decisions based on what would make them happy rather than what's strategically optimal. I know that the thought of them walking into danger makes me want to burn down anyone who might hurt them." I met her eyes. "If that's love, then I'm in more trouble than I thought." "Have you told them?" "Of course not. They're trying to make the most important decision of their life. The last thing they need is me complicating it further with feelings they may not return." "You don't think they care for you?" I thought of the way Kael looked at me sometimes when they thought I wasn't paying attention. The way they had taken my hand that night in the library, the quiet intimacy of our evenings together. The way they had asked, "What happens to us?" "I think they might," I said slowly. "But that doesn't change the fundamental problem. They have a birthright and a duty to their people. If they stay here because of feelings for me, they'll eventually resent me for it. And if I push them to stay..." I shook my head. "I won't be the reason they abandon who they are." "So you'll let them go?" "If that's what they choose." Morrigan sighed. "You really are in love with them. Only love makes people this deliberately self-sacrificing." She left me to my training, but her words echoed in my mind. Was this love? I had lived for more than 3 centuries and had carefully avoided anything that could be called romantic entanglement. Alliances, yes. Physical relationships, occasionally. But nothing that touched whatever passed for my heart in a demon's chest. Until a werewolf with amber eyes and a gentle smile had walked into my fortress and somehow slipped past every defense I had built. I was still thinking about it that evening when Kael found me in the library. They looked nervous, which immediately put me on alert. "My lord, could we talk?" "Of course." I set aside the treaty I had been reviewing. "What's on your mind?" They settled into the chair across from me, but instead of relaxing into it as they usually did, they sat stiffly, hands clasped tight. "I've been thinking about everything. About the pack, about my father, about what I'm supposed to do." My heart, which I had been fairly certain was just a vestigial organ at this point, suddenly felt like it was trying to climb out of my chest. And I keep trying to remember my father, really remember him, not just the vague impressions I have from before he died. And I realized that most of my memories aren't of him as my father. They're of him as the Alpha, this distant figure who made decisions and led the pack, who I barely spoke to because he was always busy with important matters. They stood and began to pace. A habit I had learned meant they were working through complicated thoughts. When he died, I was sad, but I don't know if I grieved him as a parent or as a lost Alpha. And now everyone is telling me I should fight to reclaim his position, to take back what should have been mine. But the truth is, I don't remember choosing that path. I don't remember ever wanting to be Alpha. "What did you want?" They stopped at the bookshelves, running their fingers along the spines. "This, knowledge, learning. I loved working in the pack archives because it meant I could spend my time with books instead of politics. When Crane took over and basically ignored me, it was almost a relief. For the first time, I could just be myself instead of the Alpha's child." "But he lied to you," I said quietly. "He stole your choice." "He did, and I'm angry about that, furious actually. But I'm not sure if I'm angry because he took away something I wanted or just because he took away my right to choose." They turned to face me. If I'm being completely honest, the thought of going back there, of leading the pack and dealing with all the politics and challenges, it fills me with dread, not excitement. Relief and something deeper washed through me. "Then don't go." "But what about my duty? What about my people?" "Kael, duty without desire is just slavery to other people's expectations. If you don't want to be Alpha, if that's not who you are, then claiming the position would be a betrayal of yourself and the pack. They deserve a leader who actually wants to lead them, not someone doing it out of obligation. Crane is a terrible Alpha. Then the pack will eventually remove him. That's how werewolf succession works. The strong replace the weak. But you don't have to be the one to do it if it's not what you want." They crossed the room and sat down again, closer this time. "What if I want to stay here?" "Then you stay." Just like that. Just like that. "But the treaty, the terms of my service." I had been thinking about this for days, planning for this possibility even while trying not to hope for it. "The treaty terms can be renegotiated. Instead of a bonded servant, you become a permanent member of my household with full status and autonomy. You'd be free to come and go as you pleased, to pursue whatever interests you chose. The library could use a proper archivist, someone who actually understands research methodology and historical preservation." Hope bloomed in their expression. "You mean that?" "I don't say things I don't mean." I paused, weighing my next words. "But I need you to be certain. In 3 months, your claim expires permanently. There's no going back after that. If you stay, you're choosing this life forever. I want you to be absolutely sure that's what you want." "What do you want?" they asked softly. It was the second time they had asked me that question. The first time I had deflected, but I had promised honesty, and they deserved the truth. "I want you to stay," I said. "I want you here in my library in my home. I want to spend my evenings discussing books with you. I want to see what you think of the new acquisitions. I want to argue with you about proper archival techniques and watch you get excited over a rare manuscript." I stopped, realizing I was revealing more than I intended. "But more than any of that, I want you to be happy. If staying here makes you happy, then stay. If you need to go back and fight for your pack, even knowing you might not want to lead it afterward, then go. Just be sure." They were quiet for a long moment, studying my face with those perceptive amber eyes. "When I first came here, I thought I was being sent to my death. Everyone said you were cruel and vicious, that you would destroy me. But instead, I found someone who gave me meaningful work, treated me with respect, and made me feel valued for the first time in years." Kael, let me finish. They took a breath. These past weeks, I've been trying to figure out who I'm supposed to be. The alpha's child, the pack heir, the servant, the scholar. All these different roles that people expect me to fill. But when I'm with you, I don't feel like I have to be any of those things. I can just be myself, and myself wants to stay. The hope I had been trying to suppress unfurled in my chest like wings. You're certain? I'm certain that I'm happier here than I ever was in the pack. I'm certain that the work we're doing in the library matters to me more than pack politics ever did. And I'm certain that when I imagine my future, you're in it. They stood and moved closer, closing the distance between us. We were nearly touching now, close enough that I could feel their warmth, smell the forest scent that clung to all werewolves. My lord, they said, and there was something new in their voice, something that made my pulse quicken. Valdris, may I be honest about something else? Always. I think I'm falling in love with you. The words hit me like a physical blow, destroying the last of my carefully maintained defenses. For a moment, I couldn't breathe, couldn't think, could only stare at them and wonder how this had happened, how I had let someone get this close. That's inconvenient, I managed. They laughed, surprised and a little hurt. That's your response. I meant for me, not you. I reached out slowly, giving them every chance to pull away, and cupped their face in my hands. It's inconvenient because I've spent 3 centuries avoiding exactly this. Because caring about someone gives your enemies a weapon to use against you. Because loving someone means accepting that they could leave, or be taken, or simply decide one day that a demon lord is too complicated to deal with. But, they prompted, leaning into my touch. But I think I'm falling in love with you too, and I've discovered that I'm willing to accept the inconvenience. Their smile was radiant, transforming their entire face. That's the most romantic thing anyone has ever said to me. I'm told my courtship skills need work. I don't know, you're doing pretty well so far. They kissed me then, or I kissed them. Later, I wouldn't be able to say who moved first. All I knew was that suddenly they were in my arms, warm and solid and real, and the careful distance I had maintained was gone completely. When we finally broke apart, both slightly breathless, they rested their forehead against mine. So what happens now? Now we renegotiate the treaty terms. I'll send word to Crane that you're remaining in my service permanently by choice, which should satisfy the pack law requirements. Your claim expires in 3 months regardless, so there's no challenge to his authority. Will he accept that? He doesn't have a choice. You're under my protection and I'm not giving you up. I softened my tone. But if you ever change your mind, if you ever decide you want to go back. They kissed me again, stopping the words. I won't. This is my choice, Valdris. You are my choice. We stood there in the library, holding each other while the fire crackled and the ancient books watched silently from their shelves. Somewhere in the fortress, I knew Morrigan was probably planning how to handle the political fallout of a demon lord taking a werewolf consort. The other powers would talk, would speculate, would probably try to use it against me. I found I didn't care. I should probably tell you about the vampire delegation's reaction, I said eventually, and the political implications of this decision, and the security protocols we'll need to update. Later, Kael said, pulling me back down when I started to move away. We can deal with all of that tomorrow. Tonight, can we just be? It went against every instinct I had, every lesson I had learned about staying vigilant and planning ahead. But when I looked at Kael, at the hope and happiness in their eyes, I found I could set aside the demon lord for one evening. Yes, I said, we can just be. We settled by the fire. Kael curled against my side in a way that should have felt awkward but somehow didn't. They pulled one of the poetry books from the nearby table and began reading aloud, their voice soft and steady. I listened, not really hearing the words, just absorbing the peace of the moment. For 300 years, I had built walls around myself, convinced that isolation was strength and attachment was weakness. It had taken one stubborn werewolf with a love of books to show me that maybe, sometimes, letting someone in was its own kind of strength. "What are you thinking about?" Kael asked, pausing in their reading. "That the first night I met you, I thought you were a problem to be managed. A political complication wrapped up in pack drama. And now? Now I think you're the best thing that's happened to me in a very long time." I pressed a kiss to their temple. The stories were right about one thing: that first night did shock me, just not in the way anyone expected. They laughed and resumed reading, and I closed my eyes, letting the sound wash over me. Outside, the moon rose over the blackened wastes, casting silver light across the obsidian fortress. Tomorrow, there would be treaties to renegotiate, political ramifications to manage, and probably a strongly worded letter from Crane that I would take great pleasure in responding to. But tonight, in this quiet moment, there was just the two of us, the fire and the books. And for the first time in 3 centuries, the demon lord of the blackened wastes felt something that might have been happiness. The stories said I was cruel and merciless, a creature of darkness who knew no compassion. They weren't entirely wrong. I had done terrible things in the name of power and protection, made ruthless decisions that haunted me in the quiet hours. But they were incomplete, because they didn't know about the library filled with beloved books, or the shadow demon who had been my friend for a century, or the werewolf scholar who had somehow found their way past my defenses and shown me that even demons could learn to love. "Valdris," Kael's voice drew me back to the present. "Oh, thank you for giving me the choice, for not making me feel like I had to choose between duty and happiness. You never have to thank me for treating you with basic decency." "Maybe not, but I'm going to anyway." They set aside the book and turned to face me properly. "I know this won't be easy. There will be people who disapprove, who try to use our relationship against you. Are you really ready for that?" I thought about the coming challenges, the political maneuvering, the potential threats. Then I looked at Kael, at the concern and determination in their eyes, and I smiled. "Let them try," I said. "I've been the cruel demon lord for 3 centuries. If they think I've gone soft because I fell in love with a brilliant, brave werewolf who prefers books to bloodshed, they're welcome to test that theory. They'll discover very quickly that protecting what's mine is what I've always done best." "What's yours?" "What's mine," I confirmed, pulling them close again. "If you'll have me." "I think I can manage that." We stayed there until the fire burned low and the moon had traveled halfway across the sky. Eventually, we made our way through the quiet fortress to my chambers, fingers intertwined, the future uncertain but somehow less daunting when faced together. As I drifted off to sleep with Kael safe in my arms, I found myself thinking that perhaps the stories would need a new ending. Not the demon lord who stood alone in his dark fortress, feared and untouchable, but the one who found something unexpected in the tribute his enemies sent him. Love in the most unlikely of places. And yes, that first night had shocked me, shocked both of us, really. But not because of cruelty or violence or any of the darkness the stories promised. The shock was gentler and more profound than that. The shock was discovering that even after centuries of isolation, the heart could still learn to open. That walls built over lifetimes could be dismantled by patience and genuine connection. That the cruel demon lord everyone feared was also just a person, capable of falling in love with a werewolf who smiled at old poetry and handled ancient manuscripts with reverent care. Some shocks, I was learning, were worth experiencing. Tomorrow would bring its challenges. The renegotiated treaties, the political fallout, the inevitable attempts by rivals to exploit what they saw as weakness. But I had faced down dragons and vampires, navigated centuries of dark politics, and built an empire from nothing. I could handle whatever came next, as long as Kael was beside me. And if anyone tried to take them from me, well, then they would discover that the stories about my cruelty weren't exaggerated at all. They would learn that there was nothing more dangerous than a demon lord protecting what he loved. But that was a problem for tomorrow. Tonight, there was just peace and warmth and the quiet breathing of the person who had somehow become my entire world. The first night had shocked us both, but every night after was a choice we made together. And that, I thought as sleep finally claimed me, was the best ending I could have hoped for.